Elena nervously took a seat at the elegant restaurant, unaware she was at the wrong table. The man across from her smiled, intrigued. "Are you waiting for someone?" Little did she know, this wasn't just any dinner. She was about to steal the heart of the restaurant's owner. Before we dive into the story, comment below where in the world you're watching from today. Elena Carter stared at her reflection in the small bathroom mirror of her apartment. She tucked a strand of brown hair behind her ear and sighed. The black dress she wore was nice enough, but it was the only one she owned. She had bought it 3 years ago for a funeral, and now she was wearing it for a blind date. Her life wasn't exactly going as planned. "You can do this," she told herself. At 28, she was tired of being alone. Her job at the small bookstore downtown barely paid her bills, but she loved being surrounded by stories of romance and adventure, even if her own life had neither. Her phone buzzed on the counter. It was a text from her best friend, Olivia. "Don't you dare cancel, he's perfect for you. Table 10 at Romano's at 7U. Elena's stomach tightened. Romano's was the fanciest restaurant in town. She had never been there, couldn't afford it. What was Olivia thinking? "Great," she muttered. "A place where the appetizers probably cost more than I make in an hour." She grabbed her purse, the nicest one she owned, which wasn't saying much, and headed out the door. Her old car sputtered to life after the third try, and she prayed it would make it across town without breaking down. 20 minutes later, Elena pulled up to Romano's. The valet looked at her car with barely disguised disdain, but she handed him the keys anyway. Taking a deep breath, she walked through the grand entrance. The restaurant was beautiful, crystal chandeliers, soft music, tables draped in white linen. Everyone looked so polished, so confident. Elena felt small and out of place. "May I help you?" asked the hostess, eyeing Elena's dress. "I'm here for a blind date," Elena said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Table 10, the hostess checked her. "List. The reservation is for 7. You're early and your companion hasn't arrived." Elena nodded. "That's fine. I'll wait at the table." "Of course. Follow me." As they weaved through the restaurant, Elena's anxiety grew. What was she doing here? This wasn't her world. The hostess stopped, but Elena was so lost in her thoughts that she didn't notice. She kept walking and found herself standing by a table, where a man sat alone. "Table 7. The man looked up. He had dark hair, warm brown eyes, and wore a perfectly tailored suit. He seemed surprised to see her. Elena froze. "I'm sorry," she stammered. "I think I got the wrong table." But something about his eyes made her pause. He wasn't looking at her with annoyance. Instead, there was a spark of interest. "Are you waiting for someone?" he asked, his voice deep and smooth. "A blind date," Elena admitted, feeling her cheeks heat up. "But I think I'm at the wrong table." The man smiled. "Well, that makes 2 of us." I was stood up. Elena felt a rush of sympathy. Even handsome men in expensive suits got stood up. "I'm sorry to hear that," he shrugged. "These things happen. I'm Daniel, by the way." "Eleanor." Daniel gestured to the empty chair across from him. "Since you're waiting and I'm alone, why don't you join me, unless you'd rather sit by yourself?" Eleanor hesitated. She should find table 10. Her blind date would be arriving soon, but there was something about Daniel that made her want to stay. "Just until my date arrives," she said, sitting down. Daniel smiled again, and Elena noticed how it reached his eyes, creating small lines at the corners. He was older than her, maybe mid-30s, but it suited him. "So, Elena," he said, pouring her a glass of wine from the bottle on the table. "What do you do when you're not agreeing to blind dates at fancy restaurants?" The way he said it without judgment made her smile. "I work at a bookstore. Nothing glamorous, but I love being around books." "What's your favorite?" Daniel asked, seeming genuinely interested. "Oh, that's like asking someone to pick a favorite star in the sky," Elena said, then immediately felt foolish. Who said things like that? But Daniel didn't laugh at her. Instead, he leaned forward. "That's a beautiful way to put it." And just like that, the conversation flowed. Daniel asked about her favorite authors, and Elena found herself talking more than she had in months. He listened attentively, asked thoughtful questions, and shared his own love of classic literature. "I'm surprised a businessman like you has time to read," Elena said, realizing she'd assumed he was in business because of his suit. "Who says I'm a businessman?" Daniel asked with amusement. Elena blushed. "Your suit. I just assumed— no, you're right, I am in business. But everyone should make time for the things they love, don't you think?" Elena nodded, taking a sip of her wine. It was delicious, probably more expensive than any she'd ever tasted. "What about you?" she asked. "What do you do exactly?" Daniel hesitated for just a moment. "I'm in the restaurant business." "Oh, do you work here?" Elena asked, looking around the elegant space. Daniel's lips quirked in a small smile. "You could say I have a vested interest in the place." Before Elena could ask what he meant, a waiter approached their table. "Mr. Romano, your special order is ready." Elena's heart stopped. "Romano, as in Romano's restaurant?" She looked at Daniel with wide eyes. "You're Daniel Romano, the owner?" Daniel nodded, looking a bit uncomfortable for the first time since they'd started talking. "I am." Elena's cheeks burned with embarrassment. She had been sitting here chatting with the owner of the most exclusive restaurant in town, a man who was undoubtedly wealthy and successful, and she'd been rambling about paperbacks and her job at a dusty bookstore. "I should go," she said, standing up abruptly. "My date is probably waiting for me." Just then her phone buzzed. She pulled it out and saw a text from Olivia. "Your date says he's running late. He should be at table 10 soon." Elena's humiliation deepened. She had crashed a billionaire's private dinner and been boring him with talk about books when he was probably just being polite. "I'm so sorry," she said, clutching her purse. "I didn't realize who you were. I've been taking up your time and—" "Elena," Daniel interrupted, standing up. "Please don't go." Something in his voice made her pause. "I've enjoyed talking with you more than any conversation I've had in months," he continued. "Stay. Have dinner. With me." "But my blind date is late," Daniel said, gesturing to her phone. "And I'm already here." Elena hesitated. This was crazy. Daniel Romano was so far out of her league that they weren't even playing the same sport. "I can't afford this place," she admitted quietly. Daniel's expression softened. "It's on the house." "I can't accept that." "Then consider it a business expense," he said with a smile. "I'm researching what customers like." Elena couldn't help but laugh. "I'm pretty sure I'm not your typical customer." "Exactly why your opinion is valuable." Something about his smile, the warmth in his eyes, made her sit back down. "All right, but I need to let my date know I won't be joining him." Daniel's smile widened. "Of course." As Elena texted Olivia, explaining the situation, she couldn't believe what was happening. She was about to have dinner with Daniel Romano, the owner of the most exclusive restaurant in town, a man whose net worth was probably more than she'd earn in 10 lifetimes. Across the restaurant at table 10, a man in a cheap suit arrived, looking annoyed. He checked his watch, pulled out his phone, and then walked out without speaking to anyone. Elena didn't notice. She was too captivated by the man sitting across from her, whose eyes never left her face as she spoke. "So," Daniel said after they ordered, "tell me more about these stars in your sky." And for the first time in a long time, Elena felt like she was exactly where she was supposed to be. 3 weeks later, Elena shelved books at Carter's Corner, the small bookstore where she worked. Her mind, however, was far away, replaying her dinner with Daniel Romano for the 100th time. After that magical evening, she had expected never to hear from him again. What would a billionaire want with a bookstore clerk? But to her surprise, the next day a delivery arrived at her apartment, a first edition of her favorite novel, with a note that simply said, "To more stars in the sky. Daniel." Her phone had buzzed minutes later with a text from an unknown number. "Would you like to have dinner again? Daniel." Since then, they had met for dinner twice more, each time at a different restaurant. Daniel was attentive, charming, and seemed genuinely interested in her life. Yet Elena couldn't shake the feeling that this was all temporary, a brief amusement for a man who could have anyone he wanted. "Hello, Earth to Elena?" Elena startled from her thoughts to find Olivia staring at her, eyebrows raised. "Sorry," Elena said, blushing. I was thinking. About your billionaire boyfriend, Olivia teased, leaning against the bookshelf. He's not my boyfriend, but you want him to be. Elena sighed. It doesn't matter what I want. We're from different worlds, Liv. This isn't a fairy tale. And then why did he send you that ridiculously expensive book? Or take you to dinner 3 times? Maybe he's just being nice. Olivia rolled her eyes. Men like Daniel Romano don't just be nice to women like us unless they're interested. Thanks. For reminding me of the class difference, Elena muttered. That's not what I meant, and you know it. I meant he's busy running an empire. He doesn't waste time on people who don't matter to him. Before Elena could respond, the bell above the door chimed, signaling a customer. Both women looked up, and Elena's heart nearly stopped. Daniel stood in the doorway, looking as out of place in the small bookstore as she had felt in his restaurant. He wore a casual but clearly expensive sweater and dark jeans. His eyes found hers immediately, and he smiled. Elena, he said, walking toward her, I hope you don't mind me dropping by. Not at all, she stammered, aware of Olivia's wide-eyed stare beside her. I was hoping to steal you away for lunch, Daniel said. If you can take a break. Olivia nudged Elena. She can definitely take a break. In fact, take the rest of the day. I'll cover for you. Elena shot her friend a look, but Olivia just grinned innocently. Are you sure? Elena asked. Positive. Go. Have fun. Daniel's smile widened. Perfect. I have something I want to show you. As Elena grabbed her purse from behind the counter, she felt a mixture of excitement and anxiety. What could Daniel possibly want to show her? Outside, a sleek black car waited. The driver opened the door for them, and Daniel gestured for Elena to get in. Where are we going? She asked as they pulled away from the curb. It's a surprise, Daniel said, but I think you'll like it. They drove through town and up into the hills overlooking the city. Eleanor had never been to this exclusive neighborhood where houses, no mansions, sat behind gates and high hedges. The car turned into a long driveway and stopped in front of a beautiful stone house with large windows and a stunning view of the city below. Whose house is this? Elena asked as Daniel helped her out of the car. Mine, he said simply. I wanted to show you where I live. Elena's stomach tightened. Why would he bring her here? Was this where the fantasy ended? As if sensing her unease, Daniel took her hand. I just want you to know me, Elena. The real me, not the restaurant owner or the businessman. His touch was warm, reassuring. Elena nodded, trying to ignore the butterflies in her stomach. Inside, the house was beautiful, but not as ostentatious as she had expected. It was large, yes, but it felt lived in, comfortable. And everywhere she looked, there were books, shelves, lining the walls, stacks on tables, even some on the floor beside comfortable reading chairs. You really do love books, she said in wonder. Daniel smiled. I told you. Now, how about that lunch? They ate on a terrace overlooking the city, the E. Food prepared by Daniel's personal chef. Elena tried not to think about how different their lives were, how the china they ate from probably cost more than her rent. You're quiet, Daniel observed after a while. Elena set down her fork. Why me, Daniel? You could have anyone. Why spend time with someone like me? Daniel looked at her for a long moment. Because you didn't know who I was when you sat down at my table, and when you found out, you wanted to leave. Do you know how rare that is in my world? Everyone wants something. From me, my money, my connections, my name. But you just wanted to escape. I was embarrassed, Elena admitted. You were authentic, and that night when I looked into your eyes and heard you talk about books like they were old friends, I felt something I haven't felt in a very long time. What was that? Hope, he said simply. Hope that maybe I could find someone who would see me, not my bank account or my restaurants, but me. Elena's heart raced. Could this be real? Could someone like Daniel truly care for someone like her? I'm not trying to scare you, Daniel continued, reaching across the table to take her hand. But I want to be clear about my intentions. I like you, Elena, very much, and I'd like to see where this goes between us. Elena looked at his hand holding hers, strong, confident, but also gentle. She thought about the wall she had built around her heart after years of disappointment, of feeling not quite enough. I'm scared, she admitted. Your world is so different from mine. Then we'll create our own world, Daniel said, his eyes never leaving hers. Together. And as the sun shone down on them high above the city where their unlikely meeting had begun, Elena allowed herself to believe that perhaps, just perhaps, fairy tales could come true after all. What she didn't know was that across town in a sleek office building, someone was watching her every move. Someone who had plans for Daniel Romano, plans that didn't include a nobody like Elena Carter. Victoria. Romano checked her reflection in the mirror of her corner office. At 45, she still turned heads with her sleek black hair, perfect, makeup, and designer clothes. As Daniel's older sister and the CFO of Romano Enterprises, she had worked hard to build their family's restaurant empire alongside her brother. But lately, Daniel had been distracted. She turned from the mirror and looked at the folder on her desk. Inside were photos of Daniel with a plain-looking woman in a cheap dress. Victoria had hired a private investigator the moment she heard rumors that her brother was seeing someone new. Eleanor Carter, she said aloud, flipping through the file. Bookstore clerk, no family connections, no money, no education beyond community college. The door opened, and her assistant stepped in. Ms. Romano, the board members are waiting in the conference room. Victoria closed the folder. Tell them I'll be right there. As she walked to the meeting, Victoria's mind raced. The Romano family had plans, big plans. They were about to expand their restaurant chain internationally, and they needed Daniel focused, not wasting time with some gold-digging nobody. Good morning, Victoria said as she entered the conference room. Let's begin. The meeting went well, but Daniel was noticeably absent. Again. Where is your brother? Asked Harold Watson, their largest investor, as the meeting concluded. Victoria forced a smile. He's reviewing a new location. You know Daniel, always hands-on. The truth was she had no idea where her brother was, and that worried her. Daniel pressed the elevator button for the penthouse of the Morris Hotel, one of his newest acquisitions. Beside him, Elena shifted nervously. Are you sure about this? She asked, tugging at the new dress. He had bought her, a simple blue one that brought out her eyes. Absolutely, Daniel replied, squeezing her hand. It's just dinner with a few friends. But it wasn't just dinner. It was Daniel's 40th birthday celebration, and the guest list included some of the most powerful people in the city. Daniel had wanted to keep it small, but Victoria had insisted on making it an event. The elevator doors opened directly into the penthouse, where about 50 people stood talking, drinking champagne, and admiring the view of the city skyline. Conversation paused as Daniel and Elena stepped in. There's the birthday boy, someone called, and people began to approach. Elena felt overwhelmed as Daniel introduced her to one person after another. Mayors, celebrities, wealthy business people, all part of Daniel's world. She tried to remember names, to smile at the right times, but she could feel curious glances, hear whispered questions. And who exactly is she? Where did he find her? Does Victoria know? After what felt like hours, Eleanor excused herself to find the restroom. As she washed her hands, the door opened, and a striking woman entered, tall, elegant, with Daniel's dark eyes. So you're Eleanor, the woman said, her voice cool. Elena's stomach tightened. Yes. And you are? Victoria Romano, Daniel's sister. She looked Elena up and down, not bothering to hide her assessment. You're not what I expected. What did you expect? Someone more suitable for my brother. Elena took a deep breath. I think Daniel can decide that for himself. Victoria stepped closer. Let me be direct. My brother is a good man with a kind heart. He sees the best in people. I admire that about him. But sometimes he doesn't see the whole picture. And what picture is that? Elena asked, trying to keep her voice steady. The one where women throw themselves at him because he's worth billions. Victoria's eyes narrowed. The one where he's vulnerable because he's lonely. I didn't know who he was when we met, Elena said. I wasn't even supposed to be at his table. So I've heard, Victoria replied. Quite the coincidence. It wasn't a, let me give you some advice, Victoria interrupted. Enjoy this while it lasts. The gifts, the attention, the glamour, but understand that it won't last. Daniel lives in a world you can't even begin to comprehend, with responsibilities you can't imagine. Eventually, he'll remember that, and when he does, don't make it difficult for him. Before Elena could respond, Victoria turned and left. Elena stared at her reflection in the mirror, noticing how out of place she looked even in her new dress. Victoria's words had struck a nerve. Elena had been thinking the same thing herself, that this fairy tale couldn't possibly last. When she returned to the party, she found Daniel surrounded by a group of men in expensive suits, deep in conversation about business. He smiled when he saw her, extending his hand. "There you are. I want you to meet Harold Watson, our biggest investor." "A pleasure," Harold said, though his eyes were curious. "Daniel was just telling us about the expansion plans." "Expansion?" Eleanor asked, looking at Daniel. "We're taking Romano's international," Daniel explained, "starting with London, Paris, and Tokyo." "That sounds exciting," Eleanor said, feeling suddenly like an outsider. Daniel had never mentioned any of this to her. As the evening wore on, Eleanor felt increasingly out of place. Daniel was pulled in different directions by people wanting to discuss business, reminisce about old times, or simply be seen talking to him. He tried to include her, but she had nothing to contribute to conversations about stock options or vacation homes in Aspen. Finally, as the party was winding down, Daniel found her standing alone by the window. "I'm sorry," he said, pulling her into a quiet corner. "This wasn't how I wanted tonight to go." "It's okay," Elena replied, though it wasn't. "These are your friends, your world." "They're not all my friends," Daniel said with a wry smile. "Most of them are business associates, shareholders, people who want something from me." "Like what your sister said about me," Elena murmured before she could stop herself. Daniel's expression darkened. "What did Victoria say to you?" "Nothing that wasn't true," Elena replied, avoiding his eyes. "That we come from different worlds. That this us is temporary." "Elena, look at me," Daniel said, his voice gentle but firm. He waited until she met his gaze. "What I feel for you is real. It's not temporary. But your life, your business, it's all so big, so important. And I'm just the woman I'm falling in love with," Daniel interrupted. Elena's heart stopped. "What?" "I know it's fast, I know it doesn't make sense, but these past few weeks with you have been the most real, most honest time I've had in years. You see me, Elena. Not my money or my name, just me." He took her hands in his. "I don't care what Victoria or anyone else thinks. This is about us. Only us." Elena wanted to believe him, but Victoria's words echoed in her mind, and she couldn't help but notice how at home Daniel looked here, among the wealthy and powerful, discussing business empires and global expansions. "Let's get out of here," Daniel suggested, seeming to sense her unease. "I've had enough of pretending to care about business on my birthday." They slipped out without saying goodbye, taking the elevator down to where Daniel's driver waited. In the car, Daniel pulled Elena close. "I want to show you something," he said, giving the driver an address Elena didn't recognize. 20 minutes later, they pulled up to a small building in a part of town Elena knew well, not far from her own apartment. The sign above the door, "Read Carter's Corner Books." Elena looked at Daniel in confusion. "This isn't Carter's Corner. That's where I work, but it's across town." Daniel smiled mysteriously and led her to the door, unlocking it with a key. Inside, Elena gasped. It was a bookstore, brand new, with beautiful wooden shelves, comfortable reading nooks, and a small cafe area in one corner. The shelves were still empty, waiting for books to fill them. "What is this place?" she asked, turning in a circle to take it all in. "Yours if you want it," Daniel said, watching her reaction closely. "I know how much you love books, how you dream of having your own store someday. I thought, maybe I could help make that happen." Eleanor stared at him, speechless. It was the most thoughtful, most perfect gift anyone had ever given her. And yet, "Daniel, I can't accept this. It's too much. It's not charity, if that's what you're worried about," he said quickly. "It's an investment in you, in what you love. But still, think of it as a loan if that makes you feel better. You can pay me back when the store is successful." His eyes were earnest, hopeful. I believe in you, Elena. I want to help make your dreams come true. Elena walked around the space, running her hand along the smooth countertop, imagining what it would be like to have her own bookstore. It was everything she had ever wanted. I don't know what to say, she admitted. Say yes, Daniel urged. Say, you'll accept this, not because it's from me, but because you deserve a chance to build something of your own. Before Elena could respond, Daniel's phone rang. He checked it and frowned. I'm sorry, I have to take this, it's Victoria. As Daniel stepped outside to take the call, Elena continued to explore the store. Her store, potentially. She tried to imagine herself here, recommending books to customers, hosting readings, building a community around stories and ideas. But a small voice in her head, one that sounded suspiciously like Victoria's, whispered that she was in over her head, that Daniel was trying to buy her affection, that she would never truly fit into his world. When Daniel returned, his expression was troubled. What's wrong? Elena asked. Nothing, he said a little too quickly. Just business. But Elena could tell it was more than that. Daniel, if we're going to have any kind of relationship, you have to be honest with me. Daniel sighed, running a hand through his hair. It's Victoria. She's concerned about us. About you. She thinks I'm after your money, Elena stated flatly. She doesn't know you like I do. And how do you know me won't change your mind? What happens 6 months from now when the novelty wears off? Daniel stepped closer, taking her face in his hands. This isn't a fling, Elena. This isn't me being bored or looking for something different. This is me finding someone who makes me feel whole for the first time in my life. He leaned down and kissed her, softly at first, then with a passion that took her breath away. When they finally parted, Elena's doubts had quieted, not disappeared, but muted beneath the strength of what she felt for him. Stay with me tonight, Daniel whispered. At my place. Not because I expect anything, but because I'm not ready to say goodnight. Elena hesitated only a moment before nodding. Okay. Victoria paced her living room, phone pressed to her ear. Are you sure about this? Positive, replied the private investigator. She spent the night at his house, and he took her to some empty storefront earlier. Victoria hung up and poured herself a glass of wine. This was getting serious. Too serious. She picked up her phone again and dialed a number she hadn't called in years. It's Victoria Romano, she said when the person answered. I need your help with a delicate matter. It involves my brother, and a woman I believe is using him. To the next morning, Elena woke to sunlight streaming through large windows and the unfamiliar sensation of high thread count sheets against her skin. Daniel's arm was draped over her waist, his breathing deep and even. They hadn't made love. Daniel had been true to his word about not expecting anything, but they had talked late into the night, sharing stories and dreams and fears. Elena had never felt so close to anyone. Carefully, she slipped out of bed, pulled on Daniel's shirt and padded to the kitchen to make coffee. As the coffee brewed, she wandered around the house, taking in details she hadn't noticed before. Family. Photos on shelves, a worn paperback by the couch, a half-finished crossword puzzle. Little glimpses of the real Daniel, not the billionaire businessman everyone else saw. In his office, she noticed a photo of a young Daniel with an older couple, his parents, she assumed, and Victoria. They looked happy, normal. Not like billionaires, just a family. Next to the photo was a stack of papers. Elena hadn't meant to snoop, but a familiar name caught her eye, Carter's Corner Books. She picked up the top sheet and scanned it. It was a purchase agreement. Daniel hadn't just rented that storefront, he had bought the entire building. For an amount of money that made Elena's head spin. And there at the bottom of the document was another name that made her freeze. Olivia Martinez, her best friend. The pieces clicked into place. Olivia setting her up on a blind date at Romano's. Elena accidentally sitting at Daniel's table. The blind date who never showed up. It hadn't been a coincidence, it had been planned. You're up early. Elena whirled around to find Daniel standing in the doorway, wearing only pajama bottoms. His smile faded when he saw the paper in her hand. What are you doing? Did you know? Elena asked, her voice shaking. Did you know I would sit at your table that night? Daniel's confusion seemed genuine. What? No. How could I? Because you paid Olivia to set it up, Elena said, holding up the document. You bought the building that houses Carter's Corner, the store where I work, where Olivia works. Daniel's eyes widened. Elena, no, that's not... Then what is it? She demanded. Explain why you're buying my workplace and paying my best friend. I can explain, Daniel said, stepping toward her. But it's not what you think. Elena stepped back. Then what is it? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you set this whole thing up. The meet-cute, the whirlwind romance, all of it. Daniel ran a hand through his hair, looking frustrated. Yes, I bought the building, but it was after I met you. I wanted to surprise you. The store is struggling. Olivia told me that when I went to see her. You went to see Olivia? Behind my back? To ask about the store. To find out if it could be saved. She told me the owner wants to retire, that the place might close. I thought I could help. Elena shook her head, trying to make sense of it all. So you just happened to buy the building where I work after randomly meeting me at your restaurant? Yes, Daniel insisted. Elena, I swear to you, our meeting was completely by chance. I didn't know who you were and you didn't know who I was. That's what made it special. Elena wanted to believe him, but the timing, the money, the secrecy, it all felt wrong. I need to go, she said, gathering her things. I need to think. Elena, please, Daniel pleaded. Let me explain properly. But Elena was already heading for the door, tears threatening to spill. She called a rideshare on her phone, unable to bear the thought of Daniel driving her home, as She waited outside, hugging herself against the morning chill. Daniel came after her, still in just his pajama bottoms. Eleanor, don't leave like this. We can talk about this. I need space, she said, not meeting his eyes. You've done nothing but shower me with expensive gifts since we met. The book, the dinners, now a whole store. It's too much, too fast. Because I care about you, Daniel insisted, not because I'm trying to buy you. The car arrived and Elena got in without looking back. As they drove away, she finally let the tears fall. Back at her apartment, Elena called Olivia immediately. We need to talk, she said when her friend answered. Now. An hour later, Olivia sat on Eleanor's couch looking guilty. I didn't know he was going to buy the building, Olivia insisted. He came to the store asking about you, asking if you were single. He seemed so nice, so genuine. And when I told him about Mr. Fletcher wanting to retire and close the store, he said he might be able to help. And the blind date? The one who never showed up? Olivia winced. There was no blind date. I just needed a reason to get you to Romano's. Eleanor felt betrayed. By her best friend, by Daniel, by everyone. Why, Liv? Why would you do that? Because you deserve something good. You work so hard, you care so much, and you never put yourself first. When Daniel Romano came in asking about you, looking at you like you were the answer to every question he'd ever had, I couldn't say no. Elena shook her head, tears welling up again. I thought it was real. I thought he liked me for me. He does, Olivia insisted. I've seen the way he looks at you. That can't be faked. But Elena wasn't so sure anymore. Had any of it been real? Or was she just an amusement, a charity case for a bored billionaire? Her phone buzzed with messages from Daniel, but she ignored them. She needed time to think, to figure out what was true and what wasn't. What she didn't know was that while she was questioning everything about her relationship with Daniel, Victoria Romano was setting a plan in motion, one that would force Elena to make a choice between her heart and her pride. And across town in a small cafe, Victoria sat across from a handsome man with a charming smile and cold eyes. Thank you for meeting me, she said, sliding a photo of Elena across the table. I need you to get close to her, find out what she really wants from my brother. The man picked up the photo, studying Elena's face. And if she's genuine, if she actually cares about him? Victoria's smile was sharp. Then you make her care about you instead. 3 days passed. Eleanor ignored Daniel's calls and messages, throwing herself into work at the bookstore. Every time the bell above the door rang, her heart jumped, thinking it might be him. But Daniel never came. You have to talk to him eventually, Olivia said as they closed the store on Wednesday night. He's called the store 5 times today. I know, Elena sighed, counting the register. But what am I supposed to say? Sorry, I accused you of manipulating my entire life. Let's go back to normal. Olivia leaned against the counter. For what? For its worth, I really don't think he planned our meeting. I never told him which table you'd be at or anything like that. I just said you'd be at Romano's that night. Elena wanted to believe that. She missed Daniel. His smile, his voice, the way he listened to her as if every word she said mattered. But the doubt lingered. Why would someone like him be interested in someone like her unless he had an agenda? The bell rang, and both women looked up. But it wasn't Daniel. It was a handsome stranger with sandy blonde hair and a friendly smile. Sorry, we're closing, Olivia called out. Actually, I was hoping to catch Eleanor, the man said. I'm Jason Miller. Daniel asked me to stop by. Eleanor's pulse quickened. Daniel sent you? Jason shook his head. Not exactly. I'm an old friend of his, and I heard you two were having some issues. I thought maybe I could help clear things up. Eleanor exchanged a glance with Olivia, who shrugged. I'll finish up here. You two can talk. Eleanor reluctantly led Jason to the small reading area in the corner of the store. So what exactly did you want to clear up? First, that Daniel's a mess without you, Jason said with a warm smile. Second, that you've got him all wrong. Have I? Look, I've known Daniel since college. He's never been the guy who buys affection. In fact, it's the opposite. He's always been suspicious of people who get too close because of his money. Jason leaned forward. Until you. Eleanor wanted to believe him, but she'd been burned before. If you're such good friends, why hasn't... He mentioned you. He has a lot of friends, business associates, but not many people he truly trusts. Jason's eyes met hers. I run a literacy program for underprivileged kids. That's how I know about you. Daniel mentioned you worked at a bookstore and might be interested in helping out. That sounded like Daniel. Always thinking of how to connect people, how to help. Why didn't he come himself? Elena asked, the question that had been burning in her mind. He thought you needed space and... Jason hesitated. His sister's been keeping him busy with emergency board meetings, contract negotiations. I think she's deliberately trying to distract him. Eleanor frowned. Victoria doesn't like me. Victoria doesn't like anyone she sees as a threat to the family business, Jason corrected. It's nothing personal. She did the same thing with Daniel's last girlfriend. They talked for another hour, Jason sharing stories about Daniel from college, painting a picture of a man who was generous but private, wealthy but down to earth. By the time they finished, Elena felt her anger softening. Maybe I overreacted, she admitted. Why don't you come to our literacy event this weekend? Jason suggested. Daniel will be there. You can talk in a neutral space, surrounded by books, your favorite thing. Eleanor hesitated, then nodded. Okay, text me the details. After Jason left, Olivia pounced. Well, what did the hottie want? To tell... I've been an idiot, Elena said with a small smile. And to invite me to a literacy event this weekend where Daniel will be. Are you going? Elena nodded. I think I need to hear him out at least. What Elena didn't know was that across town, Jason was meeting with Victoria Romano in her elegant office. Well, Victoria demanded, did she believe you? Jason nodded, accepting the envelope of cash Victoria handed him. Hook, line, and sinker. She'll be at the event on Saturday. And Daniel has no idea about any of this? None. He's been too busy with those meetings you scheduled. Victoria smiled coldly. Perfect. Make sure everything goes according to plan on Saturday. I want her gone for good. Saturday arrived, and Elena spent more time than usual getting ready. She chose a simple but pretty dress, applied light makeup, and even splurged on having her hair styled. The address Jason had sent was for a community center in one of the city's lower-income neighborhoods. When Elena arrived, she was surprised to see a small group of children sitting in a circle, listening to a story being read by a young woman. There were books everywhere and colorful posters about reading, but no sign of Daniel. Eleanor, you made it! Jason approached with a warm smile, giving her a quick hug that took her by surprise. I'm so glad you could come. Where's Daniel? She asked, looking around. Running late as usual, Jason said with a laugh. But he'll be here? In the meantime, want to help me set up for the craft activity? Elena nodded, falling easily into helping organize supplies for the children. It felt good to be useful, to be around books and eager young readers. This was the kind of thing she'd always wanted to do with her own bookstore someday. An hour passed, then 2. Daniel still hadn't arrived, and Elena's messages to him went unanswered. I don't understand, she said to Jason as the event was winding down. You said he'd be here. Jason's expression was sympathetic. I thought he would be. Maybe something came up with the business, you know how it is. But Elena didn't know that was the problem. Daniel's world, with its emergency board meetings and global expansions, was foreign to her. Let me drive you home, Jason offered. We can stop for coffee on the way, and I'll try calling him again. Disappointed and confused, Eleanor agreed. They drove to a small cafe, where Jason insisted on buying her a latte. As they sat by the window, he told her more about the literacy program, his passion evident in every word. You really care about this, Elena observed. The same way you care about books, Jason replied with a smile. Daniel saw that in you right away. It's why he wanted to help you get your own store. Elena's smile faltered. Did he tell you about that? He mentioned it. He was excited about surprising you. Elena stared into her coffee. It was a wonderful gesture, but it was too much, too soon. That's Daniel for you. When he cares about someone, he goes all in. Jason reached across the table and placed his hand over hers. He really does care about you, Elena. The touch was comforting, but something felt off. Elena gently pulled her hand away. I should go, she said. It's getting late, Jason insisted, on driving her home, and Elena was too tired to argue. When they arrived at her apartment building, he turned to her with a serious expression. I know today didn't go as planned, but don't give up on Daniel. He's worth the effort. Elena nodded, though her doubt had returned. Thanks for everything, Jason. As she climbed the stairs to her apartment, her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Before you trust Daniel Romano again, you should see who he's really spending his time with. Corner of Maple and 5th, 9 p.m. tonight. Elena stared. At the message, her stomach churning. It was probably nothing, a wrong number or someone playing a cruel joke. But the seed of doubt had been planted, and she couldn't ignore it. At 8:45, she took a ride-share to the address, feeling foolish and anxious. The car dropped her off near an upscale restaurant with large windows facing the street. And there, visible through the glass, sat Daniel at a table with a beautiful woman. They were laughing, heads close together, looking intimate and comfortable. As Elena watched, frozen on the sidewalk, Daniel reached across the table and took the woman's hand. Hot tears blurred Elena's vision. Victoria had been right all along. What they had wasn't special. She was just one of many women in Daniel's life. She was about to turn away when someone called her name. It was Jason, looking surprised to see her. Elena, what are you doing here? She gestured helplessly toward the restaurant window. I got a text saying I should come here, that I'd see who Daniel was really spending time with. Jason looked through the window and his expression hardened. I'm so sorry, I had no idea. Who is she? Eleanor asked, her voice barely a whisper. Jason hesitated. Her name is Sophia. She was Daniel's fiancée before he met you. Elena felt the world tilt. Fiancée? They broke up about 6 months ago, or at least I thought they did. Jason put his arm around her shoulders. Come on, let me get you out of here. Elena let Jason guide her to his car, too numb to protest. Everything made sense now. Daniel's interest in her, the expensive gifts, the too-good-to-be-true romance. She had been a diversion, nothing more. I feel so stupid, she said as Jason drove her home. Don't, he said firmly. Daniel is the one who should feel stupid for letting someone like you go. At her apartment, Jason insisted on walking her to her door. You shouldn't be alone right now. Let me make you some tea, at least. Eleanor hesitated, but the thought of facing her empty apartment alone was too much. She nodded and let him in. As Jason made tea in her small kitchen, Elena sat on the couch staring at nothing. Her phone buzzed with a text from Daniel. Elena, please call me. I need to explain. She turned her phone off without responding. Jason returned with 2 mugs of tea and sat beside her, closer than necessary, but Elena was too upset to care. "You know," he said after a while, "I've always envied Daniel. He has everything, money, success, good looks. But seeing how he's treated you, I don't envy him anymore." Elena looked up, surprised by the intensity in Jason's eyes. "Any man would be lucky to have someone like you, Elena. Someone real, someone with passion and integrity." His hand found hers. "Daniel's a fool." The warmth in his voice was comforting, and Elena found herself leaning into it. When Jason moved closer, she didn't pull away. And when he kissed her softly at first, then with growing hunger, she let herself respond. It was a mistake. She knew it even as it was happening. But she was hurt and angry, and Jason's attention was a balm to her wounded pride. A knock at the door broke the moment. Elena pulled away, flushed and confused. "Ignore it," Jason murmured, reaching for her again. But the knocking became more insistent, followed by a familiar voice. "Elena, I know you're in there. Please, we need to talk." "Daniel." Elena froze, her eyes wide. "I can't deal with this right." Now Jason stood up, straightening his shirt. "Let me handle it." Before Elena could stop him, he walked to the door and opened it. Daniel stood on the threshold, his expression changing from hopeful to shocked as he took in the scene. Jason, in Elena's apartment, Elena on the couch looking disheveled. "Jason?" Daniel's voice was bewildered. "What are you doing here?" "Taking care of Elena," Jason replied coolly. "Someone had to." Daniel's eyes darted from Jason to Elena. "Elena, what's going on?" Elena stood up, her emotions a turbulent mix of anger, guilt, and confusion. "I saw you, Daniel, at the restaurant with your fiancée." Daniel's brow furrowed. "My what? I don't have a fiancée." "Ex-fiancée, then?" Elena corrected bitterly. "Sophia, right?" Daniel's confusion deepened. "Sophia? My cousin, Sophia." It was Elena's turn to be confused. "Your cousin?" "Yes, my cousin who's visiting from Italy. Who told you she was my fiancée?" Daniel's gaze hardened as he looked at Jason. "What have you been telling her?" Jason's charming demeanor faltered for just a moment. "Only the truth, man. That you've been stringing her along while reconnecting with Sophia." "There is no reconnecting with my cousin," Daniel snapped. "And how would you know anyway? We haven't spoken in years." A cold feeling spread through Elena's chest. "You told me you were friends with Daniel, that you've known him since college." Jason's smile turned brittle. "I may have exaggerated our connection a bit." "Who are you?" Daniel demanded, stepping into the apartment. "And what are you doing with Elena?" Jason's expression changed, becoming calculating. "Victoria sent me. She thought Elena needed to see what kind of man you really are." "Victoria?" Elena and Daniel said in unison. "Your sister hired you to what? Spy on me? Manipulate Elena?" Daniel's voice was dangerous now. "She hired me to protect the family business." "From another gold digger," Jason replied, dropping all pretense of friendliness. "But I have to say, Elena, you're a lot prettier than the last one. I almost feel bad about all this." Elena felt sick. "Get out." Jason shrugged. "Fine, my job's done anyway." He walked to the door, pausing to look at Daniel. Victoria was right about one thing. This little bookstore romance was never going to last. You live in different worlds. After Jason left, a heavy silence fell between Elena and Daniel. "I'm so sorry," Daniel finally said. "I had no idea Victoria would go this far." Elena wrapped her arms around herself. "He kissed me, and I let him." Daniel's jaw tightened, but he nodded. "I understand. You thought that you were with someone else, that everything between us was a lie." Elena's voice broke. "And the worst part is I believed it so easily, because deep down I've been waiting for this to fall apart from the beginning." Daniel stepped closer, his eyes pleading. "Elena, nothing about us is a lie. Not my feelings for you, not our connection, not anything." But Jason was right about one thing. "We do live in different worlds," Elena said quietly. "Your sister hiring someone to break us up? Secret board meetings and business expansions you never told me about? That's your world, Daniel. And I don't know if I belong in it." "You belong. With me," Daniel insisted. "Wherever that is." He took her hands in his. "Yes, my life is complicated. Yes, my family. or at least Victoria, can be difficult. But none of that changes how I feel about you. And how do you feel? Elena asked, needing to hear it, even though she was afraid of the answer. I love you, Daniel said simply. I love your passion for books, your kindness, your integrity. I love how you see me, not my money or my name, but me. And I'll fight Victoria, the whole world if I have to keep you in my life. Elena wanted to believe him, wanted to fall into his arms and forget everything that had happened, but the doubt lingered. I need time, she said, to think, to sort through everything. Daniel nodded, though she could see the pain in his eyes. I understand. But before I go, there's something else you should know. He pulled an envelope from his jacket and handed it to her. The real reason I couldn't make it to the literacy event today. Eleanor opened the envelope and found a deed inside. The deed to the building that housed Carter's Corner books. But it wasn't in Daniel's name, it was in hers. I transferred ownership to you, Daniel explained. No strings attached. Whether we're together or not, the building is yours. You can keep working at Carter's Corner or open your own store or sell it, whatever you want. Eleanor stared at the document, speechless. I'm not trying to buy your forgiveness, Daniel continued. I just want you to have options to be secure. Because I love you, and that means wanting what's best for you, even if it's not me. He leaned in and pressed a gentle kiss to her forehead. Take all the time you need. I'll be waiting. After Daniel left, Elena sat alone in her apartment, the deed in her lap, her mind and heart at war. She loved Daniel. She could admit that now, at least to herself. But was love enough to bridge their different worlds? And what about Victoria? If she had gone this far to break them up, what would she do next? Victoria was waiting in Daniel's office when he arrived at Romano Enterprises the next morning. Long night, she asked, noting his rumpled appearance. You could say that, Daniel replied coldly. I was busy cleaning up your mess. Victoria raised an eyebrow. I don't know what you mean. Jason Miller, Daniel said, tossing a folder on the desk between them. The man you hired to manipulate Elena. Victoria didn't bother denying it. I was protecting you, protecting our family business. By lying? By hurting someone I care about? She's using you, Daniel. Can't you see that? She's a nobody from nowhere who happened to sit at your table one night, and suddenly you're buying her buildings, talking about love. I do love her, Daniel interrupted. And if you can't accept that, if you can't respect my choices, then maybe it's time we reconsider our business arrangement. Victoria's eyes widened. What are you saying? I'm saying that as of this moment, you're suspended from your duties as CFO. The board will be informed later today. You can't do that, Victoria protested. I built this company with you. Without you, we might actually focus on the restaurants instead of endless expansion and profit margins, Daniel said firmly. I founded Romano's because I love food, love bringing people together around a table. Somewhere along the way, you turned it into a corporate machine. Victoria stood up, her face flushed with anger. You'll regret this. That girl has clouded your judgment. No, Victoria. For the first time in years, I'm seeing clearly. Daniel walked to the door and held it open. Now please leave my office and stay away from Elena. If you go near her again, your suspension will become permanent. After Victoria stormed out, Daniel sat heavily at his desk. He had meant what he said to Elena. He would fight for her, even if it meant fighting his own sister. But now that the confrontation was over, doubts crept in. What if Elena decided their worlds were too different? What if the damage Victoria had done was irreparable? His phone rang, interrupting his thoughts. It was Harold Watson, their biggest investor. Daniel, we need to talk, Harold said without preamble. Victoria called an emergency meeting with the investors. She's claiming you're mentally unfit to lead the company. Daniel closed his eyes, realization dawning. Victoria wasn't going to give up so easily. When is this meeting? He asked. Tomorrow morning. And Daniel? She's brought receipts, expenditures you've made recently, property purchases. She's painting a picture of a man who's lost control. After hanging up, Daniel sat in silence, weighing his options. He could fight Victoria, use his controlling interest in the company to shut her down. But it would be messy, public, the kind of scandal that could hurt the business, the employees who depended on Romanos for their livelihoods, or he could give Elena up. Return to being the Daniel that Victoria and the board approved of, focused solely on business, keeping his personal life separate and controlled. The choice seemed impossible. But as Daniel stared out his office window at the city below, he knew what he had to do. He picked up his phone and made a call, not to Elena, not yet. First, he needed a plan. Meanwhile, Elena had also made a decision. She called Olivia early in the morning. "I need your help," she said. "With the building." "Daniel's building?" Olivia asked, confusion in her voice. "No," Elena replied. "My building." By the time the sun set that evening, Eleanor had drawn up plans for a new bookstore in the space Daniel had shown her. She had talked to lawyers, to the bank, to contractors. She had taken the first steps toward her dream. Not because of Daniel, but for herself. As she stood in the empty store, imagining shelves filled with books, readers lounging in comfortable chairs, children gathered for story time, she felt a peace she hadn't experienced in weeks. Whatever happened with Daniel, she would be okay. She would build something of her own. Her phone buzzed with a text. It was from Daniel. "I know you asked for time and I respect that, but Victoria has forced my hand. If you still care for me at all, please meet me tomorrow at Romano's. Table. 7 p.m. Everything I've been fighting for, including us, depends on it. All my love, Daniel." Elena read the message twice, her heart racing. It sounded serious, urgent. Was Daniel in trouble? Despite everything, she knew she would go. Because no matter how different their worlds were, her heart was still firmly in. Here's what she didn't know, was that across town, Victoria Romano was setting an even more dangerous plan in motion, one that would force Elena and Daniel to decide once and for all if their love was worth fighting for. Elena stood outside Romano's restaurant, her heart pounding in her chest. The last time she'd walked through these doors, she had been a different person, nervous about a blind date, unaware that her life was about to change forever. Now she knew exactly who would be waiting for her at table 7. The question was, what would happen when she sat down? She had spent the day alternating between excitement and dread. Whatever Daniel needed to tell her, it sounded important, possibly final. Was he ending things, giving her an ultimatum, or was there something else going on, something to do with Victoria's schemes? Taking a deep breath, Eleanor pushed open the door and walked inside. The restaurant was unusually quiet. In fact, it seemed empty except for the host, who smiled when he saw her. "Ms. Carter, welcome back. Mr. Romano is waiting for you." As she followed him through the restaurant, Eleanor realized that it was indeed empty. No other diners, no waitstaff bustling about. Just silence, and the soft glow of candlelight coming from a single table in the center of the room. Table 7. Daniel stood as she approached, his eyes never leaving hers. He looked tired but determined, his usual perfect appearance slightly rumpled, as if he'd been working non-stop. "You came," he said, his voice filled with relief. "Your message sounded urgent," Elena replied, trying to keep her tone neutral despite the flutter in her stomach. "Is everything okay?" Daniel pulled out her chair. "That depends on what happens in the next hour." Once they were seated, Eleanor noticed that the table was set with the same wine they had shared on their first night together, a small, meaningful touch that wasn't lost on her. "I know you asked for time," Daniel began, "and I wanted to give it to you. But Victoria has forced my hand." "What did she do?" Eleanor asked, concern replacing her nervousness. Daniel poured them each a glass of wine. "After I confronted her about Jason, I suspended her from the company. In retaliation, she called an emergency meeting with our investors, claiming I'm mentally unfit to lead Romano Enterprises." Elena's eyes widened. "Can she do that?" "She can." "Try," Daniel said grimly. "The meeting is tomorrow morning. Victoria has gathered evidence of my erratic behavior, buying buildings for bookstore clerks, neglecting expansion plans, making emotional decisions instead of business ones." "The building," Elena murmured. "I never asked you to do that." No, Daniel said quickly. I didn't do it to manipulate you or to buy your affection. I did it because I believe in you, in your dream. Elena studied his face, seeing the sincerity there. I believe you. But why tell me this? I don't see how I can help with your business troubles. Daniel took a deep breath. Because my response to Victoria, to the board, to everyone questioning my judgment, depends on you. On me? How? I have two choices, Daniel explained. I can fight Victoria, use my controlling interest in the company to shut her down. It would be messy, probably public, and potentially damaging to the business. Or, Elena prompted when he hesitated, or I can give them what they want. Go back to being the Daniel Romano they expect, focused solely on business, making decisions based on profit margins, keeping my personal life separate and controlled. His eyes met hers, which would mean ending things between us. Elena felt as if the air had been sucked from her lungs. You're asking me to choose whether you should give me up to save your company? No, Daniel said firmly, reaching across the table to take her hand. I'm telling you that I've already made my choice. I choose you, the company, the money, the restaurants. None of it means anything if I can't share it with someone I love, someone who sees the real me. But your family business is important to me, Daniel acknowledged. But not more important than you, not more important than being true to myself. Elena squeezed his hand, deeply moved but still confused. If you've already decided, why did you need to see me? Daniel smiled softly. Because before I go into that meeting tomorrow and tell Victoria and the board that I'm choosing love over business, I needed to know if there's anything to fight for. I needed to know if you feel the same way about me. After everything that's happened, after everything, Daniel confirmed, the misunderstandings, Victoria's interference, our different backgrounds, all of it. I love you, Elena. I've never been more certain of anything in my life, but I need to. No, do you love me too? Elena looked into his eyes, and all the doubts and fears that had been swirling in her mind seemed to quiet. This man, this kind, generous, honest man, had chosen her over everything else in his life. Not because of some romantic whim, but because he truly believed in what they had together. I do love you, she said softly. I think I've loved you since that first night at this table, when you listened to me talk about books as if it was the most interesting conversation you'd ever had. Relief and joy washed over Daniel's face. Then that's all that matters. Whatever happens tomorrow, we'll face it together. But what about Victoria, your company? Daniel's expression turned thoughtful. I've been thinking about that too, and I have a proposal for the company and for us. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small box and a folder. First, the business proposal, he said, opening the folder to reveal a business plan. I want to transform Romano's. Instead of expanding endlessly with identical restaurants, I want to create a new kind of space. Restaurants combined with bookstores, places where people can enjoy good food and good books together. Elena's eyes widened. Like a literary cafe, but on a larger scale? Exactly. Each one would be unique, catering to the local community. And I want you to be my partner in this venture, not just as my girlfriend, but as the creative director. Your bookstore would be the flagship, the model for all the others. Elena scanned the proposal, her mind racing with possibilities. It was a beautiful vision, combining Daniel's passion for food with her love of books, creating spaces where people could connect, not just over meals, but over stories. It's brilliant, she admitted. But will your investors go for it? Some will, some won't, Daniel said pragmatically. But I've run the numbers. It's actually less risky than Victoria's global expansion plan because we can start small, adapt as we go. And I've already spoken to Harold Watson, our biggest investor. He loves the idea. And Victoria? Daniel's expression hardened slightly. She'll have a choice. She can support this new direction, or she can sell her shares and move on. Either way, she won't be interfering in our relationship anymore. Elena nodded, impressed by Daniel's resolve. Then her eyes fell on the small box still sitting on the table. And what's that? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Daniel picked up the box but didn't open it. This is the second proposal, and it's entirely separate from the first one. Whether you want to be my business partner or not, this question stands on its own. Elena's heart raced as Daniel got up from his chair, and right there in the empty restaurant knelt beside her. "Elena Carter, I love you. I love your passion, your integrity, your courage. You've shown me what really matters in life, and I don't want to spend another day without you by my side." He opened the box, revealing a simple but elegant diamond ring. "Will you marry me?" Elena stared at the ring, then at Daniel's hopeful face. It was fast, too fast, by conventional standards. They had known each other only a few months, had weathered misunderstandings and manipulations, had come from entirely different worlds. And yet, she had never been more certain of anything in her life. "Yes," she said, tears filling her eyes. "Yes, I'll marry you." Daniel's face lit up with joy as he slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, as if it had always been meant to be there. He stood and pulled her into his arms, kissing her with all the love and promise of their future together. When they finally parted, Elena looked at the ring on her finger, then at the business proposal on the table. "So, I'm going to be a Romano," she said with a small laugh. "Both personally and professionally." "Only if you want to be," Daniel assured her. "The business partnership is completely separate from our engagement. You can say no to one and yes to the other." Elena shook her head, smiling. "Daniel Romano, I love you because you always give me a choice. But in this case, my answer is yes, to both. Yes to being your wife and yes to creating this beautiful vision together." Daniel kissed her again, and in that moment, all the doubts and fears that had plagued them both seemed to vanish. They had found each other by accident, a wrong table, a mistaken identity. But what had grown between them was no accident at all. It was real and true and worth fighting for. 1 year later, Eleanor stood in the center of Chapter and Verse, the bookstore cafe that had once been just a dream. Sunlight streamed through the large windows, illuminating shelves filled with carefully chosen books. Comfortable reading nooks invited visitors to linger, while the cafe area served delicious food inspired by Daniel's original restaurant. It was opening day, and Elena couldn't stop smiling as she watched people explore the space, finding books, ordering coffee, settling into the cozy chairs. "Nervous?" asked Olivia, who had become the store's manager. "Excited," Eleanor corrected, twisting her wedding ring, a habit she had developed over the past 6 months of marriage. The door opened, and Daniel walked in, his face lighting up when he saw her. He made his way through the crowd, stopping to greet customers and check that everything was running smoothly. "What do you think?" Elena asked when he reached her, gesturing to the busy store. "I think it's perfect," Daniel said, his eyes filled with pride. "Just like I knew it would be." The Romano literary cafes, as they had come to be called, were proving to be a success. They had opened 3 so far, with plans for 2 more by the end of the year. Each one was unique, reflecting the community it served, but all shared the same core philosophy: bringing people together through food and books. "Have you heard from Victoria?" Elena asked. It was still a sensitive subject, but one they had learned to discuss openly. Daniel nodded. "She's doing well with her new venture in Miami. I think getting away from here, starting something of her own, was good for her." After the confrontation with the board, where Daniel had presented his new vision for the company and made it clear that his personal life was not up for discussion, Victoria had chosen to sell her shares and move away. The relationship between the siblings was still strained, but healing slowly. She had even sent a wedding gift, a small but meaningful gesture of reconciliation. "Daniel, Eleanor," called a voice, and they turned to see Harold Watson approaching, a book in one hand and a coffee in the other. "This place is remarkable. Exactly what you promised it would be. Thank you for believing in us," Daniel said, shaking the investor's hand. "Best decision I ever made," Harold replied with a chuckle. "The numbers from the first 2 locations are exceeding projections, and the customer feedback has been extraordinary." As Harold moved away to explore more of the store, Daniel slipped his arm around Elena's waist. "Happy?" he asked softly. Elena leaned into him, thinking about the journey that had brought them here, from a mistaken table at a restaurant to building a life and a business together. It hadn't always been easy, merging their worlds, navigating family dynamics, learning to be partners in every sense. But it had been worth every moment. More than I ever thought possible, she replied honestly. A group of children settled into the reading nook for story time, and Elena smiled at the young woman who was about to read to them, one of several staff members they had hired from the same low-income neighborhood where the literacy program operated. That had been Elena's idea, creating jobs as well as a love of reading. "I should get back to work," Elena said, reluctantly pulling away from Daniel. "The author for our evening event will be here soon." Daniel nodded, but held her hand a moment longer. "Table 7 tonight?" he asked with a smile, referring to their standing date at the original Romano's every week. "Wouldn't miss it," Elena promised. As she moved through the store, helping customers find books, checking on the cafe service, Elena couldn't help but marvel at how life had changed. She had gone from a bookstore clerk dreaming of more to the creative director of a growing company and the wife of a man who valued her ideas as much as he valued her heart. And it had all started with sitting at the wrong table. Later that evening, as Elena and Daniel sat at their special table in the now busy restaurant, they toasted to their success. "To new beginnings," Daniel said, raising his glass. "And to happy accidents," Elena added with a smile. The restaurant hummed with life around them, people laughing, enjoying good food, sharing stories. At a nearby table, a woman sat alone, checking her watch nervously. A blind date, perhaps, waiting for someone who might change her life. Daniel noticed Elena watching the woman. "Reminds you of someone?" he asked with a smile. "A little," Elena admitted. "I hope her evening turns out as well." As mine did. Just then a man approached the woman's table, looking confused. "Is this table 10?" he asked. The woman shook her head. "No, this is table 12. Table 10 is over there." "Oh, I'm sorry," the man said. But instead of moving away, he hesitated. "You know, since I'm already here..." Elena and Daniel exchanged knowing smiles as the man sat down across from the woman, introducing himself. "Should we tell them that's how the best love stories start?" Daniel whispered, reaching across the table to take Elena's hand. "No," Elena replied, her eyes filled with love as she looked at her husband. "Let them find out for themselves." And as the new couple began their conversation, Elena and Daniel continued their own story, the one that had begun with a mistake and grown into something true and lasting. A reminder that sometimes the wrong table was exactly the right place to be. In her sleek Miami office, Victoria Romano stared at the magazine on her desk. The cover featured Daniel and Elena at the opening of their newest literary cafe, looking happy and successful. The headline read, "Romano Literary Cafes, How One Couple is Redefining Dining and Reading." For a moment, regret washed over her. She had been wrong about Elena, wrong about what Daniel needed. The business was thriving under their joint leadership, in ways she hadn't anticipated. Her assistant knocked on the door. "Ms. Romano, your 3 o'clock is here." Victoria closed the magazine and straightened her shoulders. "Send him in." As a handsome man in a well-tailored suit entered her office, Victoria offered her hand and a professional smile. "Mr. Collins, thank you for coming. I've reviewed your proposal for the Miami expansion, and I'm interested in hearing more." As they sat down to discuss business, Victoria glanced once more at the closed magazine. Perhaps it was time to make amends, to truly accept Elena as part of the family, to rebuild what she had nearly destroyed. After all, if there was one thing the Romano family understood, it was that sometimes the best things in life came from unexpected beginnings. The end.